There's no question.
I have a question. I'm not sure. Is it Remigijus? Just with regard to defence in small countries, it seems to me that a possibility could be contracts, defence contracts with bigger countries, alliances. There's probably nothing, and there might be some implicit contracts, explicit contracts where for a certain amount of money. A contract is made with a much bigger, stronger power to come to their defence, to have a presence, and to do that work. It could be a win-win situation. The bigger country gets some money, and the smaller country gets hopefully a workable defence arrangement. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I have. And of course, historically, these facts are weird. That was quite common to this, and I mentioned some facts in some interview I spoke to again, which is true, but for example, they were well recorded aspects when contracts when Palermo citizens and entrepreneurs were contracting states, and actually what I heard yesterday, the concurrence actually were negotiating or deciding whom to invite to protect them. Actually, these are not explicit private contracts as such, but very similar ones. And actually today, Iceland is almost in the same situation right now, because it virtually has no real military forces in our normal understanding, and actually US is kind of a protector for Iceland. So I think that it's, of course, it is normal practice and it's quite a viable solution. But in practice, I must say that these contracts have quite a different economic essence in many cases, because sometimes it is a normal contract and you just invite a company or even a state acting as a company, in such a case, as a protector. And in some cases, it's just deciding which bully are you going to pay in order to be protected against the other bully, and being like needed for this bully because they are the taxes or just money for protection. So, but I think that's one approach.
Could I comment on that?
Yeah.
Actually, that's a really bad idea. The whole idea of collective security only spreads wars. If you contract, say, with the U.S. by joining NATO, as the Baltic nations have, what you do is that you ensure that we're going to have Cold War II. I mean, look, the biggest bully on earth is the U.S. government. I mean, no other government is going around invading countries and actually setting up a principle of preemption. I mean, it's just unprecedented arrogance. So that when you're talking about bullies, you really have to start with the capital, the world capital of bullyism is Washington, D.C. And, so I was kind of astonished to see Putin up there and not George W. Bush. One is the teacher and one is the student.
Maybe you want to upgrade to the USSR, actually, Russian Federation, because I think it's very America-centric, and I fully understand it when you live in America. That your own power is the biggest bully, but it's like not noticing what actually Russian Federation is doing.
Well, I mean, I don't see the Russian Federation invading any Baltic country, and I see no prospect of doing that. But by Estonia joining NATO, that is a provocation. I mean, NATO should be abolished, and the UN. I mean, the U.S. should pull out of NATO. Of course, NATO was founded to ostensibly, defend against so-called Soviet expansionism. But in fact, didn't the Soviet Union dissolve? There is no more communism, so there's no more reason for NATO to exist, if there ever was a reason, which I very much doubt. And plus, like we were talking about, the free rider. Well, what you're writing on is my pocketbook. Thanks for no thanks.
Well, the question I was going to ask you concerns what seems to be a violent discrepancy between the way Justin and Robert reported what was going on in Europe and the United States, and Justin depicted the American media as being almost uniformly hostile to Ron Paul, which is exactly what I remember. In fact, both of us commented on as blog writers how hostile the American media was. You, then Robert, gave the impression that this was somehow more characteristically European, but I don't think it was very much, unless I'm wrong, there was probably not much difference. Would you agree, or do you think the European press was even more contemptuous and neglectful in terms of reporting Ron Paul's candidacy?
Well, basically, the European press did their best to ignore him, and they had an easier job ignoring him because the Americans the media were more or less ignoring him or disparaging him. So for them it was, which one is the most likely, or which ones are the most likely of the Republicans and the Democrats? We're going to report about them and the big differences between their issues, which this Ron Paul, he's sort of strange, he's got weird views, we don't understand that. So you have to, there's an extra effort involved in understanding what he's actually talking about, and if you've got a strict timeline and everyone else in the country you're reporting about is talking about all the others, there's not much of an incentive to start to talk about this weird guy. He was largely ignored. So there may have been a half sentence on a normally length article of 500 words or so. There, half a sentence. So yes, Ron Paul was a bit strange. That was it.
Yuri? Well, I just want to again make a short comment, a question also. The comment is that I can see that all hate now comes in Washington DC definitely. But I would like to kind of to point out the gesture that was not the United States who murdered 1/3 of Lithuanians or 1/5 of Poles. It was Soviet Union. And President of Russian Federation today saying that Soviet Union was the greatest country in the world. And everything which it did is very good. So that's why I can completely back Remigijus in his picturing the president of Russian Federation, KGB, colonel, who is all covered with blood and minced meat, in all this kind of thing. Besides that, I'm reading an American government by Remigijus, in which he is saying that all the small countries of Europe should have a system of collective defense against the big bullies. He calls the bullies Russia, Germany, and Italy. For some reason, well, it was probably because it was written in 1944. But what do you think if, for example, instead of NATO, we would have small countries with a collective, as Ocean Remigijus, for example, for Baltic states and Eastern Europe? One is writing about 23 Eastern European countries to have the system, what you call it, Eastern European Democratic Union.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm getting awfully tired of hearing about how Putin is, the new Stalin. I mean, Russia is demographically shrinking, okay? The Soviet Union is over, and Russia is lucky if it survives into the 22nd century as a unitary state. And if you look at what is happening, the West is encircling Russia deliberately as a strategy. Okay, they have NATO. NATO is at the gates of Moscow, number one. Georgia is about to enter NATO. Kyrgyzstan is about to enter NATO. We have bases all around, and every day we have George W. Bush or some neocon in the State Department or elsewhere saying, yes, Russia is backsliding. Well, Russia is not only backsliding, given that they're coming out of how many years of the most oppressive authoritarian government ever. And you know what? I don't think that Putin personally killed all those Lithuanians. This is just emotional demagoguery and warmongering. And if we have a second Cold War, it'll be because well-meaning people are mouthing this rhetoric. And that's all you're doing. The neocons hate Russia. And that is their next goal. They want the oil in Central Asia. They want more bases. and that's their agenda. And if you want to sign on to it, well, then you're welcome to it, Yuri, but I won't.
I'm very, very surprised because, I mean, we are on the side of liberty. Why do you think Georgians or Ukrainians or Lithuanians wanted to join NATO? And because they were the love George W. Bush? No, because they're very much afraid of that evil coming from Kremlin. That's what it is, yes. Besides that, I talked a couple of days ago, I talked to a friend of mine who's a guy in Moscow. And I talked to him about attitude towards Putin, and he said, okay, I'm the guy in Moscow, I hate Putin. So should I embrace George W. Bush then? Or if you hate George W. Bush, and I don't like him as well, so should I support Chavez or Castro or...
No. No one is saying you should support Putin or Chavez.
But that's what you do. Right?
No, I do not. And I don't recall doing that. What I am saying is that we ought not to declare Cold War II before anybody does anything. And look, I mean, who is provoking who? Let's look at the empirical facts. They are not.
You completely denigrate Georgians, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, and you should decide that in Washington, D.C. whether you should be.
I'm just saying that I don't want to subsidize their defense, and I don't want. I want the U.S. out of NATO. I mean, look, if you want to defend yourselves, fine. If Georgia feels that it must have Abkhazia, even though Abkhazia does not want to be part of Georgia, and it must have South Ossetia, even though the South Ossetians don't want to be part of Georgia. I mean, what about secessionism? If Kosovo can be independent, why not South Ossetia?
Another question, please. Boy.
Robert, in America, on the heels of Ron Paul's message, not Ron Paul with Hans-Hermann, but his message, we have about half a dozen candidates who call themselves Ron Paul Republicans. Do you anywhere in the European scene see Ron Paul candidates emerging?
Well, in one word, no. at least not yet. The difficulty, of course, with Europe is that in America you have this centralized system with now one person who is aiming at the center, so he is a point to which everyone is looking. And we have now the European Union, but it doesn't have this presidently. We don't have it yet, but and even if you did, we've got 27 different countries with I don't know how many different languages, which makes it much more difficult for such phenomena to emerge. And because we are from Europe just looking at the American situation, we're just those that are convinced by Ron Paul. We still are looking for possibilities to express this, but I can't see at the moment that it could be anything candidates. At least like in Germany, not because it's such a we don't even there we have the president, but he's not elected directly, so he has to go through the system first, very much more than in America, and the same applies to Britain. Similarly, and certainly in France they had a direct but I can't see that emerging in the near future. There will be different forms of development, and I'm sorry I'm speaking sort of vaguely, but I can't see that kind of development yet.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm representative of the Groezinger thinking. So I think we must talk about this issue because maybe you are not very well informed about the problems in Germany. I think that there are several things coming from KGB, what happened in Georgia. And we are not very happy with that, of course. Our institution is not a political institution. We are think tank which works on economic things and sufferers of Austrian for economics. And I don't think that this, what you said, are really real life of the people around the Russian Federation. Maybe we have wrong information.
Do you have a question, or is that just...
No, he wants to announce that he wants to talk to you.
Oh, okay. In other words, meet me outside. Okay.
Any other questions?
Just with regard to the Ron Paul in Europe, it occurred to me when that discussion was going on that it's almost a franchise, it's almost a brand, and regardless of language, it can almost be promoted as a Ron Paul. It's a brand. So, have any comments on that?
It certainly has all the characteristics of a brand. I envision sort of franchise-like structures where people work independently, decentralized, and find their own ways of expression, which may, especially in Europe, be mainly outside the official political sphere, but having a great effect on the political sphere by using websites and blogs to organize events that have great publicity value, and so in this way promoting the brand. Yes.
Well, I have a non-European question. Yeah.
Okay.
Just being a U.S. voter myself, we wouldn't be able to vote for Ron Paul, right? But should we then vote for Mr. Barr? What can we say about him? Barr, the advertising candidate.
Well, I haven't followed him very much. I've only sort of about 2 or 3 weeks ago heard about him. I don't know very much about him. I'd rather pass that question to Justin.
Well, I mean, if I endorse Barr, I mean, you're not going to be for him, are you? I'm kidding. No, I mean, actually, Bob Barr is the continuation of the Ron Paul revolution. But again, I mean, Ron Paul really rose because he is such an unlikely icon. I mean, he's modest. It's not all about him. And it's just about ideas. I mean, Bob Barr is much more of a politician type, and he has a long record. I mean, he was the leader of the impeached Clinton campaign in the House of Representatives, you may recall, Americans in the audience. And so, I mean, he is not Ron Paul. So, I mean, it's not the brand. I mean, it's not the same brand. And I can't see young people going crazy for Bob Barr. I mean, it's really too bad that Ron did not run as a third-party candidate. But he's getting on in years, and I think he wants a rest. But yeah, Bob Barr is great, and if he gets nominated, didn't he have a convention? Does anybody know? Right, yeah, it's going on right now. And who knows what the wackos in the Libertarian Party are going to do, given their record. I mean, somebody else may get the nomination, but I mean, I was a supporter of Bob Barr as a private individual, if anyone gets it. So yeah, go Bob, go.
Well,
question to Remigijus. In continuation of our question of should we be in NATO and who should be in NATO and should there be a defense alliances, what is your take on the issue? Do you think is it viable to have defense of legal small nations, and would they act as a pulley then if they are all gather up and try to be like medium-sized country or bigger-sized country?
of course, I admit that entering NATO means entering some club of collective defense and actually collective defense of states. And actually, what Lithuania pays, or other Baltic states pays for entering NATO is a constant pressure to increase defense budgets up to 2% of GDP, which is still lower, but still resist, but it's like pressure to increase it, and with increasing taxation. Then we, of course, are like mildly pushed to participate in non-NATO, but collective kind of defense actions in Iraq or Bosnia or in Afghanistan, and Lithuanian soldiers do, and of course I'm against that. But on the other hand, there are some circumstances, and it's very understandable that citizens of small country, let's say Lithuania or Estonia, they do not care so much about how stupid American voters are. If they want to invest money or spend money on some kind of NATO or collective security, it's okay, why not spend on our security? of course it's free riding on your taxpayers' money. But if you are willing to pay this money, I do not have to care for this. So it's kind of your problem. And again, maybe I'll elaborate a little bit more about this. I completely do not understand what you mean by provocation, because there are some people and some heads of states which are constantly being provoked, even though similar actions concerning other people or other heads of states are not being treated as provocation. And speaking about like this pacifistic nice stories about singing revolutions, which are participated as well, or other kind of revolutions, I very much admire those. But actually, I skip that from my presentation, is that in order to have this kind of revolution successful, you have to have at least some kind of consent with an aggressor. Because in this case, for example, in this story about from the movie, let's say about Estonia, part of the story is that Johar Dudayev, who was after became a president of Chechnya, was chief of one of the biggest garrisons in Estonia, and actually he ordered his soldiers to stay inside, not to attack those singing peaceful people. And in some other cases, again, it was like consent. And the same was like in British and Indian liberation movement. The same was in Nazi Germany, attitude towards Danes or Norwegians or citizens of Netherlands, because they treated it somehow as higher than those citizens of Poland or Belarus, for example. And it meant that so Danish people were able to be called successful in peaceful, non-violent resistance. But it depended very much on the attitude of them. And so the pacifism is very nice, but it doesn't work at all. And one last remark is that we have to be very cautious when speaking about collective security or national security, because all these concepts, collective security, national security, centralized security, planned security, tax finance security, these all are quite different concepts. And a kind of collective security, when I agree with my neighbor to protect each other, or we agree to pay defense agents, it's also kind of collective security. There's nothing wrong with it. We have to look to other aspects of all this. So collective security as such doesn't mean centralized security or taxpayers' money and finance security. So these are completely different things.
If I could just answer that. If you want to know what the provocation is, it's called the missile defense shield, which means that now in Czechoslovakia, Poland, and throughout Eastern Europe, there is a system in place which would enable the West to conduct a nuclear first strike on Russia. So they consider that, well, let me finish, they consider that a provocation, and they feel endangered, especially in the context of the warmongering rhetoric and anti-Russian rhetoric coming out of the White House and many neoconservative media outlets. And as far as this idea of collective security, I would refer you to Ray Rothbard on the evils of collective security. And his argument, very briefly, was that this spreads conflict. That if you have these all these alliances that what started out as brush fire will turn into a conflagration. and a world war. And in fact, that's how World War I started. And no one was advocating, and finally, I just want to say that I know you don't care whether you're oppressing U.S. taxpayers, but I know that internationalism is not reciprocal. So you want us to protect you, but you don't care if we're oppressed by a state. I mean, that is I don't know, it doesn't seem right.
Peter?
Thanks. I actually wanted to come back to Remigijus's remarks a little bit, and also some things that between the Yuri and Justin show here. It seems to me that there was actually an attempt between the wars, at least a couple of attempts, at collective security among the small states. There was the Little Entente, there was the Balkan Pact, I think there was at least one other similar kind of agreement, and of course they failed ultimately to protect the national independence of those states. And I think the reason that they failed, and the reason that these kinds of arrangements have failed in the past, is something that Remigijus hit upon at the very end of his remarks. Unfortunately, you only touched on this briefly, but I think this is really the key, and that is free trade and investment. That the thing that was lacking in the interwar period, the reason why, in my opinion anyway, the reason why these attempts at collective security among the small states ultimately failed is because they weren't matched. Military agreements and military cooperation, such as it was between the different successor states of the Habsburg and Ottoman empires, and Roman empires, wasn't matched by similar economic integration between those states. And one of the things that you posited that I thought could be a very fruitful line of inquiry is whether or not ultimately the only real defense of a small country against a larger neighbor or imperial-minded threat is to encourage investment by that neighbor, to make it in the material best interest of that country not to attack a small country like Estonia or Lithuania or what have you. Now, my question though is that this sounds to me, I'm very attracted to this proposition, but I'm wondering if the flip side of this is that historically anyway, nationalists have always regarded foreign investment not as some kind of benign way of fostering cooperation. They've regarded foreign investment as bullying. Now, what I'm wondering, I guess my question to you is, given this both empirically and theoretically, what do you think in the case of Baltic states, with which I imagine you're most familiar, but you can expand this out to other areas that you may have experienced. But I'm just curious, to what degree do you think the climate for this really exists currently in Lithuania? Is foreign, saying that Russia should be interested in investing money in Lithuania? Do you think that most Lithuanians, or do you think the general perception of that investment would be as yet another kind of Russian bullying, or do you think that it would be welcomed as a way of fostering some sort of peaceful relations with Russia? Thanks.
Thank you. I also think that this is actually one of the main points I wanted to stress, but I must say that this is not acceptable to the majority of the population to think that way, unfortunately. And just to give some examples, Lithuania have one example. We have huge oil refinery factory, which is connected with Druzhba, or friendship pipeline with Russia, which supplies oil. And this refinery was twice sold to foreign investors, and because first of all it was sold to an American company with huge pressure from US embassy and so on, and it was like a slogan that we will not let Ivan to the pipe. We will not let Ivan to the pipe. Ivan means like symbol of Russian investors, and it actually meant one Greek person from Lukoil. And actually, the idea was that if we will let Lukoil into the factory, it will mean that we will be like some kind of pocket of Russia. And in fact, as the company was sold to Americans, of course, guess what happened? The Druzhba pipeline was under construction in the course of like 4 months, and it was closed, and it was not economically efficient to transport oil through other means, and it means that this Williams company in this case had to sell the company again to Russian company Yukos, which was like, okay, it was treated as a better Russian company than oil, but afterwards with some kind of like legal maneuvers when leaders of Yukos were when Yukos was nationalized actually, the Lithuanian government was able, by Russians, the Lithuanian government was able to buy it out and to resell again. In this case again, to Polish company Orlen, which is actually a state-controlled company. And what we have again, like problem with the supply of crude oil to the factory. And in fact, it's a very good illustration how big powers, or any powers actually, react. If you don't let them in, of course, they have other means to implement their policies. And if we could imagine that Russian company would be owner of this refined factory now, I'm sure there will be no such problems. I'm not 100% enthusiastic about this. It doesn't solve all problems, because in case of World War II, for example, if you have a bullying neighbor which is completely crazy, it doesn't care about private investments, and any kind of investment, of course, it doesn't help. But in most cases, I guess it's very helpful. And the case of Switzerland also is kind of this case.
Remigijus, in general, and let's be practical, what do you think about your country's foreign policy? What do you like about it, or would you change anything dramatically in it?
Partly Lithuanians are a little bit like longing for great past of antiqueness of Lithuania, when actually Moscow was once under control of Lithuanian Jews. Together with both, that's all. But and this actually, this is a kind of national, not pride, but being more strong inside, even to resist the Soviet occupation after World War II. So I think that was one of the reasons why the resistance was even more active in Lithuania than in Latvia. So my hypothesis. But now it plays, I think, very negative role, because Lithuania tries to be negotiate and active player in every kind of orange or color revolutions, like in Ukraine, or try to be negotiated in case of Georgia, whatever. And I think this is completely wrong, because I think it's very impractical, spiritual approach, and get involved into quarrels, and I think that's wrong. But what I think is very good is just to tell the truth, to base foreign policy on truth. And for example, now Lithuania is the only country in the EU which is vetoing EU negotiations with Russia on several grounds, including Russia's military actions in Caucasus, including denying to send to Lithuania those people who were involved in killings of innocent people during the 90s, and including some other aspects. And as you know, Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland mostly, were those states who made some severe comments concerning the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, or big national war, as Russia called it. And when they said that, for some countries, the World War II didn't finish with May 9th, and then, that we were still occupied. So telling these truths, I think, is very fruitful, and I think that many people have to understand that, if you go to major cities in Russia, the main streets of the cities are still named Communist Street, Lenin Street, and Similar Street. And communist killers they have monuments there. Stalin is one of us, as you recall, one of the most popular figures in Russia. And this is quite frightening, being a neighbor of such country.
Paul.
I have mostly a question to Justin and then Robert regarding the Ron Paul movement future. What do you see? What's going to happen next? This is very unlikely that Ron Paul will get a nomination of the Republican Party. He has spoke out about when the convention will come, and he might speak there or not. Or how do you see this going forward in maybe your perspective, not like until presidential elections?
Well, the Ron Paul people are very well organized, they are very dedicated, and they're very active in the local party organizations in Kansas, in Texas, in Oklahoma, in Montana, and in a few other states. They are causing plenty of trouble for the GOP establishment. So what they have is what the Trotskyists used to call the entryist strategy. That is, you enter a large organization that has some views that are compatible with your home. And you enter and you organize inside, and you try and recruit in that way. And that's what they're doing. Even in San Francisco, I had the Ron Paul people are running a full slate of candidates for County Central Committee. So, this is a long, patient, glory from within. It's just like in Great Britain, on the left, you had the militant tendency, a Trotskyite group, which practically took over the Labour Party in, I believe, the 1980s, or the late 1980s. Watch on TV for the platform fight over foreign policy, right on the floor of the Republican National Convention. We have delegates. I think they have like 55 delegates to the National Convention, and they can get up and they can speak and they can make motions, and they will. So it's going to be very, but it's a long-term thing. You have to build a national network of local organizations that do the very patient, boring from within, and educational work that needs to be done. And Ron Paul's biggest triumph may be that he had a book that was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So, his book is being read by millions of people, and it's being pushed, and ideas rule the world. So if they do, and we have the best ones, maybe we're going to after all. Who knows?
In addition to that, it's a long-term project, and the chances of it succeeding are fairly good. The majority of people who are involved and dedicated are pretty young. Sort of teenagers to 30s is a huge majority in Europe as well. We cannot say yet what's going to happen in a year or so, which is short term still. But we can say that it's going to stay. These people are mentally out of the system. They're not going to go back in. And they're staying out, and they're doing that educational thing because they like to do it. It's like this Wikipedia. You write about what you like, and people learn from that.
We're at 5 o'clock.